welcome to The Wizard and the Priestess. I am Nola and my co-host is...
Matt the Wizard.
Welcome. Today we'll be jumping straight into our conversation on grief. Now, where should we get started, Matt?
As a warm-up, where did this come from? Because you said we'll touch on it.
We touched, yes. So I think what we were talking about potentially was I was talking about the emotions and the emotions and their correlation to organs in the way that I practice.
Yep.
And we were going to start to unpack something, and I quickly caught you and blocked you from taking
You got
us
me on
down.
a tangent, so now here is said tangent.
Here is said tangent. Yeah. So I guess we can start with, what is grief?
Grief. I'm sure there's a dictionary definition
You didn't look that up.
out there, which is not in the dictionary, paradoxically enough.
Right.
I think grief is really the discord between you and your own perception for me. And I think grief is the separation that you feel when you feel that you're separate from the thing that your ego wants. It's like a separation between soul and ego.
Okay.
What is it from a TCM view?
So really straight, simple terms, grief is the emotion that is correlated to the lung.
Mm-hmm.
It is when there is a imbalance of the lung chi or the lung energy. So we don't see grief as a kind of functioning emotion. So the functioning emotion of the lung would be to accept,
Right.
to let go, and that would be the functioning emotion of the lung. So when we're moving through the cycles of the 5 elements and in that cyclical process, lung or metal is the final position. It is the ending of the cycle. It is the autumn, the falling of the leaves, the letting go of all the fruits that have been produced, and now they're rotting deep into the earth until they go so deep, contracting deep into the earth that they turn into metal before they then become the unknown on the other side. And that is the new cycle of life.
So essentially it's an alchemy process.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah.
It's that ending part.
Yep.
So when there is grief, that is seen to be disharmony. So it is not meant to, it is not, it is a disharmony to the lung itself. And the way we'd see that physically, or we would see that in terms of chi and movement, would be that there's a contraction in the lung. And that physicality of that contraction of the lung actually kind of reduces the amount of yin in the lung.
So you talk about the actual physical,
Could be physical
expansion, collapse of the lung and the pleura and all those tissues.
Right. Yeah. So if we consider it in a sense of when we breathe, and you know that feeling after you've had a really big cry. So the simplest form of grief and the actual movement of releasing that through that tears. Sometimes, obviously, the tears don't completely release the grief, but the movement and motion of those tears is actually a process of allowing the expansion of the lungs to allow that opening, to let everything open and spread and expand and then release and contract. And that really big...
Relax and contraction.
that movement itself is really powerful for the lung.
Yeah.
Sort of the way I think about this is when we've lived with a lot of grief for a long period of time, everything contracts and kind of becomes hardened. There's not that moistness that flows through the pleura, flows around the outside, keeps everything soft and moving, and it kind of starts to calcify.
So when you say lung, is it also rib cage as well?
You could say so. It's an area. So it's not it's not in Chinese medicine, we don't think of the organs as the organs specifically.
Yeah.
It's not okay.
So it's essentially everything on that nerve channel as well. Is that right?
Quite possibly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so that whole expansion and contraction that the lungs naturally do when they are well and functioning. So when they're out of balance, it's likely that grief can be involved.
Sure.
And so when we think about that, what tends to support that in like helping it physically is to promote yin, promote that fluid exchange again, promote that expansion and contraction in a healthy way, larger breaths, longer breaths, working the body.
So if you're promoting yin,
Yes.
would you say grief is a yang emotion, if that's the way you say that?
I wouldn't say
Like excess yang?
not particularly. I wouldn't say that, so no.
Okay.
But it would be any friction is going
Right.
to have yang.
Yeah.
So if we look at any emotion with any particular organ or anywhere, there's going to be friction when it is in disharmony.
Yeah.
So that, yes, is going to create a bit of fire, a bit more yang energy,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily that grief itself is a yang, has a yang aspect other than that, right?
Yeah.
But like any disharmony has that. Once there's friction, that's when we go with everything softens and flows. It doesn't mean that there's no yang in that, but it's the friction that creates the fire potentially.
Yeah. So grief is the lung,
Yes.
pleura. It would also affect the heart to a degree, I would assume, in Chinese medicine.
Yes. Oh, like absolutely, because we are one whole being.
Yep.
You don't get to just have one thing without impacting anything else.
Nothing happens in isolation.
No.
Yeah. What about the neck, thyroid?
Yes, but it is more interlinked to
Yep.
other aspects. But yes, absolutely.
And what about the nerve channel of the lung?
The meridian?
That's what I meant.
What
Nerve channel
what
and
are you trying to
meridians are
say?
different. So, for example, something that happens on a nerve channel,
Yes.
the symptom can show up in the hand, for example,
Yeah, right. Yeah,
but
okay.
it's really coming from the neck.
Right, yeah.
So, from a meridian perspective,
Yes.
how can you, where can a symptom show up on that meridian that you've seen and you've linked it back to grief/lung?
Oh, yeah, like pain in the
Stuff.
thumb,
Yeah, okay.
movement, like skin conditions,
Yeah,
anything on the exterior of the body.
yep.
The lung is essentially the skin.
Yeah, okay.
So that's all interlinked.
Yep.
So if we've got skin conditions, generally we can look towards the lung quite quickly.
Yeah, right.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's only grief related.
Sure.
However, your skin is essentially an extension of the lung.
Yep.
And the lung and the skin being that initial, we have this layer in Chinese medicine where we call the Wei Qi, and that is the exterior of the body. Essentially, everything meets the Wei Qi, and depending on your level of immunity or like your immune system's capability, it will, like the stronger you are, the more robust you are, the stronger your Wei Qi is.
Yeah, okay.
That exterior layer, which is related to the lung, the strength of the lung and the strength of the skin itself.
Would you also say that's the rainbow bridge between you and the outside world?
Yes.
Okay, so that's heavily lung. How you present to the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Because what your skin shows, like I remember as a child, like, 14 to 16-year-old girl was always considering, like I remember the most gorgeous people weren't really that attractive. They just had good skin.
Yeah.
They didn't necessarily have to be like
Yeah.
beautiful,
Yeah.
but there was something about the skin that was like vibrant.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a really clear indicator of how their shen, maybe how the shen or their po or whatever that spirit is showing up to the outside, which is
glow.
their glow. And
Yeah.
that's a really clear indicator of the strength of
okay.
their lung, because it's the strength of their skin,
Yeah, wow.
which is related.
Yep.
Yeah, lung is it's a really important organ, and it is so important in our world.
You can't live without it.
Absolutely not. But it is something about it from that kind of more spiritual aspect that we're touching on now. The reason I find it so important is because a lot of the time, which is sort of what you were touching on previously, is that idea of like what you think is and what really is, or that separation between what you think could be and what it is in reality.
Yeah.
And what is that reality? Well, whatever is going on in your mind is that reality.
Yeah.
And so I think that, when we kind of come to this with those ideas, with that spirituality of the lung and that the realization of how to actually soften into grief a lot of the time is to work through all the layers and levels to find acceptance. And I'm just going to segue here with this dude that I really like. I listened to a podcast of his a long time ago, and his name is David Kessler, and he is a grief researcher through his own experience of extreme grief, losing a child. And he talks about, so the basics of knowing from a Western standpoint, from my understanding, is these 5 stages of grief.
Right.
And I'll read them out here. So they're denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And so essentially you will go through those, not in any particular order, but you will go through those at some point through your grieving process.
Yep.
And it isn't A to B to C to D. It doesn't work like that. It works in whatever way you are working. But what he also touches on is sort of like the 6th, and I think this might be his book. I'm not 100% on that. However, he does really touch on finding meaning as being the core to acceptance, essentially. And I think there's an acceptance, but then there's the finding the meaning. And until we've actually found the meaning, it's almost like we're not quite there. And whereas in a TCM perspective, it's kind of cool that these sort of Western views of psychology and this Eastern spirituality really connect in that it's in the acceptance that the friction is gone and the cycle can start again. And until we find acceptance in whatever that might be, we are in friction, we are stuck in disharmony. And so, and then that extra layer from David Kessler, which is that finding meaning piece, which is just something that I think is really special.
Yeah, I think for what came to me when you were saying that is that the finding meaning to it, accepting it, it's really important for the ego to navigate its way through it. And what the Western world has done. And I think for me, it's a bit of a double-edged sword where we love a definition in the West, don't we? Everything has a specific definition. So that is great to give something a name so you can essentially have a relationship with it. Yeah. Good or bad, your call. However, with that label that you're now put in a box.
As in you have to find acceptance and meaning? Is that the box?
Well, the box is... It could be a label, for example. So you could be labelled...
Sad boy.
Sad boy, right? But what's that based on? It's based on typically research being done. If you don't fall within a certain parameter of quote-unquote norm, you're given that label. Right. And it's a great way to sell you...
A story.
A pill of something.
Oh, right. Okay.
So that's the shadow of that. But I think... accepting it, having a relationship with it, it does make it easier for the ego to kind of dance with.
Right, and be able to move through.
Absolutely.
Do you want to dive into your personal experience with grief, Matt?
There's been a couple. I am thousands of years old in my wizard body. No, I would say I lost my mum when I was 3.5. So I grew up actually quite angry at... quote-unquote God for taking mum. And it wasn't till I was it was either side of 30, let's say 30 for simple math. And what was essentially driving the anger was the grief. So I didn't know how to process that as a 3.5-year-old. And I'm sure I went to therapies and counselling and all that kind of stuff. I don't remember it. I was too young. People in the family spoke about it to the degree they could, but I think in their head the energy I got was, well, how do we say this to a child? Yeah. So I get it, but at the same time, it's therapy for them sharing, and it's therapy for me feeling them share. But I never really got that.
No, there's a bit of dissonance.
So I didn't really know what to do with that grief, so I decided unconsciously to turn it into anger. And then I probably projected a lot of that anger on my stepmom. And I can say this in hindsight now. I'm very blessed today that I can say I've had 2 mums in this lifetime. And me and my stepmom get on really well now. Shout out, Mazzy. But that was my pattern. Yeah. And it was always a real deep underlying thing. As in, you couldn't really find, someone would look at a tree. Oh, that tree is beautiful. You'd be like, yeah, that's all right. It's a tree.
That was you.
That was me.
Yeah.
I was really good at pessimism. But it was just that was the underlying cause. I played victim for a lot of my life. And as I said before, when you play victim, you're also villainizing yourself. Until one day I had a meeting with a shaman, and I was just having a conversation with him, and he just said a few lines that for me, it melted everything away. And the first thing he said about, mum leaving was, she knew she could help you more from a different place. And that just got me right between the eyes. Like it was just being whacked. And I think in that exchange, I found it in myself to forgive mum. Not that anyone did anything wrong, but you know what I mean. Forgive mum, forgive anyone who was involved with that process, and forgive myself for holding on to it. And it literally felt like water was pouring out of my body through my skin. The funny thing with that is I had asthma up until that moment. I always had a mid to low level of asthma. And where do we hold asthma?
Well, yeah. Constriction of the lung.
Right? So I was Chinese burnsing my lung
Totally.
emotionally for my entire life.
Totally.
And it's all unconscious.
Absolutely.
But we never get taught. I don't think there's a technique for that kind of stuff.
But I guess that's something that, like, we're hoping to spread to people to even understand the simplicity of that.
Yeah.
Have a look out, watch out for that. Becoming aware of the really gentle, subtle signs that you can see in littler people, even people that are big people too. These subtle signs of we do that in our work.
Yeah.
We're searching the subtle signs that aren't so subtle for us.
Yeah.
To find the big missing links, and it's always that way.
I think it's important to also put out there for people that when we're born, our biological age
Zero.
our biological age should age with our chronological age.
Oh yeah, we should move. Yeah.
If anything, it should stay younger. The biological age is our body's age. Chronological age, just because linear time keeps going. But our psychological age stops at our first trauma.
Yeah.
I was a 30-year-old man in the world
3.5-year-old body.
with let's say a 3.5, 4-year-old psyche.
Yeah.
So it can present in really weird ways, especially clinically.
What were you like as a 4-year-old PT?
Well, got all the chicks back there.
Obviously works for you.
The guns, yeah. No, but if you go through something, say if you're having a conversation with a partner and something gets sort of triggered in you and that 4-year-old comes online, that's the one that perceives and projects your current reality in that moment.
In that experience.
Yeah.
In that trigger. In that. Yeah, absolutely.
So that's where I was going with that.
All right, yeah.
Thank you for that clarity.
Do you have a good relationship with that 3.5, 4-year-old now?
Yeah.
And do you feel that, I know we talked about creating that relationship from your perspective for the ego to kind of find acceptance and find meaning. Would you say that you have done that? Like I know for you, the forgiveness was the big piece that actually allowed you to soften in. But do you also feel that you have found meaning?
Absolute meaning.
Yeah.
It wasn't a pleasant experience, only because I had to relive it several times before I felt like I viscerally got it.
Right.
And
embodied it.
Yeah. It wasn't a thing to be afraid of.
No.
It was several roads that led to it.
Yeah.
Several of them being, well, how can you work with people if you haven't gone through that yourself? There's also, I want to live my life. Like I'm not
3 anymore.
Yeah, essentially. And it's not like it was a contract.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Soul contract. So that was my little journey with it.
Totally. The wizard must live on.
The wizard has to move on, but also the wizard has a lot to share. And I can't do that from a place of being in grief and fear all the time.
Yeah.
So I had to step out of that. And I can recognize the triggers today,
Right.
but they just don't put me in that place.
Yeah, they're there. They're
Yeah.
activating, but they're not activating enough that you actually function from them.
But they're a part of me, and they have to be, because that's my story, right? Mm-hmm. Just like you with your stuff.
I don't know, stop don't look at me like that.
Nolla's perfect.
Absolutely.
No, but any trauma you've been
Totally.
through, it's a scar that
Absolutely.
you wear.
Calm
Call
yourself. Yeah, absolutely. So there is like, I guess something to touch on with this is that when we think about grief and we think about that emotion, a lot of the time in its bigger instances, it's related to the death of someone.
Yeah.
Could you touch on that from your perspective? I guess you almost started this podcast talking about that, but you want to just kind of death and the grief of
that relationship.
Yeah.
So for me, it's about not getting caught up in the fear. There's a trap of fear of death first. We perceive death to be the end. If you study any kind of science, it shows that the entire universe is made of energy and information. Energy can't die. So death is really the illusion of separation of self and other self. And once you go out of the body, back into time, space, then you're one with everything anyway.
Yeah, right.
So,
but you might be one with everyone, but that's the thing. It's not about you. If you're the person that's gone to time, space, from space, time,
No.
It's about the people that aren't there right now, that are
Yeah.
still on this earthly plane.
yeah. So they're the ones that feel the illusion of that separation.
Right.
That's
So
where I was
it's an
going.
illusory understanding.
Well, if you get to the core of it, it is the illusion.
Yeah,
that
because the energy
keeps
is
us-
still existing there.
Absolutely. And if you think about someone who's passed,
Yeah.
they may as well just be behind the curtain.
Yeah, in that infinity ring of energy.
Yeah. So just because we can't see them, we can always feel that they're around. And
And you feel that with your mum?
all the time. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you always do that, or was that when you were 30?
No, when I was, very young, I've always been able to walk into a room. I could pick out anyone and tell you exactly what kind of day they've had and, see auras, that kind of stuff. And I used to get in trouble because I never used to ask people how they were.
What would you say? I
I just wouldn't say anything because I look at them and I'd already know
So why'd you get in trouble?
from not asking people how they were.
So what would you say? Hello.
I would
You've
force
had a shit
myself,
day.
hello, how are you? But I would look at you, for example. I already know.
Don't even start. You look at me, what would you say?
Treading lightly is what I... Just going to take this one. I want to go to the other room, okay? No, but
Go on, it's
anyway.
okay, I'm fine. I'm okay here. I had a
So
great day. Tell me
when-
more.
I very rarely ask clients how they are
Oh, yeah, okay.
because I can take one look at them and I know how they are.
Okay.
But as in our culture, we have to ask how people are.
Oh, okay.
So it's a social constructy
Situation.
thing.
Yeah.
I can't remember the question.
That's all right. Neither.
Cool. Oh, the death thing.
Well, we moved through that, but I think
Yeah.
I guess the big part of that is that, is to understand that and I guess if I bring it back to my understanding, so there is no real death in complete. So energy still exists, and the information might alter. Is that okay from your perspective?
Yep.
From my perspective, that I'm with you on that. So then, therefore, when someone physically formed dies, their energy exists. It just moves. And that shaman mentioned to you, that your mother knew that she could do better work for you or serve you better,
Yeah.
not here, not in the physical realm. And from my perspective, with the cycle of life that I'm so caught up in, or that I feel really it keeps going around and around and around, is this idea that Matt's dying.
Good.
You good?
Yeah.
So my thinking in there is that like everything is living and dying. It's constantly happening. Like the sun is living and dying every day and every night. It lives, and then you could see it as death. And so there's life and death that's happening constantly. And then we get to this, this magical form of human. And then we create relationship to this human, and we create community around this human, and we create so much like abstract connection to this particular human that gives particular things for particular purposes in my life. And then all of a sudden those particular connections and purposes it's as if it seems they are now gone because they're not the same as they were. But when we think of life and death happening consistently all the time, like I am not who I were yesterday. And it is like that process of change is happening consistently. And we're not really, there's a really beautiful poem, and I don't know who wrote it, and it might not be even a poem, but it was a story essentially, and this lady was talking about how she was grieving the loss of her younger child as her child aged. And it's like watching that process. Like I think my oldest daughter was only 2 at the time. And then I remember thinking back to when she was little, and I could even make myself teary thinking about this and reliving this experience of like watching my children grow is like the most like uplifting and heartbreaking experience, because you don't know when you wake up tomorrow what child you're going to wake up to. And that can be heartbreaking in the sense that you wake up to someone who's slightly dysregulated but it's more about waking up to someone who is talking to me and clearly asking for what they want from the day before where it wasn't clear. Or, just like, and I mean, my oldest child is 4. So I can only imagine what this is going to be like for the rest of her life. And then there's the process of like this slight grief that is kind of life and death, that is like, okay, I feel this feeling, and then I dissipate and let that go because this is the life I'm in now and I choose that.
Well, what just arose to me then is death is really a transition. Anytime you transition is that's what death is. Without getting too deep into that now. But any time that, let's say you go through a trauma, okay?
Yeah.
Trauma A, we'll call it.
Yeah.
Now you've gone through this trauma A, you've worn that. You've got the scars, you've got the experience, you've got the memory of it. So that becomes a part of you. And a part of the healing process is that part of you dying, so you're reborn again. More wise, more experienced, more battle hardy, more battle ready, however that works for the person. But I think that goes on constantly, all the time.
So I guess one of the big things is I know people that have experienced really big griefs in their lives or big traumas, and how they can help themselves. And I guess, for you, there must have been a point in time and a space that you got to that you were accepting of hearing something, because I have heard that myself. I even often say this, I often wish someone had have told me this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's like you probably heard it 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But you weren't receptive to receiving it. And so I think for those that are experiencing or have experienced really big grief and are trying to actively make their way through, which I don't think many of the patients that I have worked with that are traversing really big grief, I don't think they realize what they're trying to do. It's not like a conscious effort. It's not, okay, I realize I need to consciously adjust myself here and make an adjustment or a change. I don't think that's a real common thread. It's more, I'm trying to survive
Yeah.
day to day. I'm trying to survive this big experience, which has got nothing to do with what 4-year-old child or 10-year-old or whatever was that they actually experienced, but they're just doing their life, and then something happens that says, hey, I'm going to just get on the straight and narrow here and figure this one out. And from my perspective, it's always like I can kind of pair that pretty quickly back to what may have happened.
Yeah.
And then we kind of bring it back forth into the now.
Yeah.
But what would you say is like some actionable piece that someone could do to help themselves?
I don't think there is a special magic technique that works for everyone. But all I can share from my own experiences is if you can find the space and the time to really be brave enough and sit with it and feel what you need to feel. Go through what you need to go through. Yes, I would always recommend, talking to someone, whatever that looks like, to anyone, be it a friend, family, partner, therapist, whoever that is, and find meaning to it. It happened for a reason, and it's really easy to say that in hindsight. And when you're in it, it can seem really raw. That's probably the last thing you want to hear.
Kind of rude.
Well, yeah, it's all you.
I'd feel rude. I'd feel that would be rude.
Yeah. So.
Or not rude, but really hard to hear someone tell you that.
Well, probably too soon.
Oh, how soon? if I was rude, if I felt it was rude and raw, if it was too soon.
If it's too soon, then it's essentially a time violation. We all have a different time violation.
You're right.
I think mine's different to most people's.
How long do you reckon your time is?
6 minutes.
6 minutes.
Everyone's got their own style.
Totally.
Everyone's got their own space needs, time needs, whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
And a lot of the grief is not only grief, and they're actually likely feeling it unconsciously. There's just this heaviness over them. In my experience, grief is often coupled with guilt and shame, which can often be prerequisites to them feeling that way.
Okay.
And that really comes in my experience again, that comes from a programmed mind.
Right.
And the incongruity there.
Yeah.
So I'd always challenge the person, get them to challenge their own beliefs.
Right.
And see what thoughts led to that particular feeling. Because the thought and the feeling, they hold hands and they go around and round and round and round. Not together, but they're not separate.
Yeah.
Either. So that would be probably my biggest tip. But again, it depends on the person. For me, you also have to eat right. You have to drink good water, all the health stuff that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Because that will give you the physiological capacity to handle what you're thinking and feeling. Like a strong mind needs a strong body, and vice versa. So for a way for someone to feel, for them to know what they're feeling is real, they have to have a clean body. You won't do it on McDonald's all the time. Everything we've spoken about up until this point would help.
So they can just go back and listen to the last few episodes.
It's probably best to listen to it several times.
And definitely subscribe. Definitely.
At least 11 or 12. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything more you wanted to touch on for this particular?
Yeah, I will. So I don't know if I've said it before.
All right, guys, hold on. Here we go.
Get comfy. What I would say is that the human body doesn't lie. The body mirrors the mind. Our body ultimately reflects the choices we've made. Now, we hold emotion in the soft tissues of the body, literally in the fascia surrounding the organs and some muscles. Our skeleton, our posture, portrays our unconscious psychological state. I think it's imperative for people just to check into themselves
Yeah.
and know that each, and you'd know this as well, each organ is an organ of reception. So the lung attracts lung consciousness, the liver attracts liver consciousness, etc., etc. They all process and perceive different wavelengths, right?
Yeah.
The combination of that creates human consciousness. So without the emotions, without grief, we wouldn't be human.
Right. So the way I would look and work on or work with someone with, stuck in disharmony, I use those words, stuck in disharmony. Whereas your more would be that, well, it just is. It's living. It's experiencing. And I guess that's the thing. That's those tears of happiness, sadness, grief that come and go. That's part of the living of being a human. But then it's being stuck in disharmony, which is where things get a little bit sinister because you can't actually see it more and more. And then, like you've just suggested, if we keep checking in with ourselves and looking at ourselves in the mirror and going, okay, where is it in my body that I'm uncomfortable? Where is it in my body that I'm not functioning well? Where is it in my body that I see I'm in dysfunction or disharmony? And physically, then we can create a knowledgeable experience or relationship to that. And then we personally deep dive into the metaphysical and the emotion. And from my perspective, nearly every chronic disharmony stems from something that is not physical.
No, of course, yeah, couldn't agree more.
And then I guess we could segue and keep going, but I think we'll leave it at that because that is what grief is. And I think we could probably touch on every organ and go through all the different layers of that. And we might
that'll be later episodes.
Later episodes. I'm not going to throw that a number. We'll just eventually get to that. So thank you again for listening to The Wizard and the Priestess.
Well, we hope you got something from today, and I hope that resonated with some of you, at least on some kind of level, to spark something within you to potentially help someone or help yourself.
Yeah, we just want to send our love to anyone who is experiencing deep grief and pain in this time. And just remember that you're never alone. Peace.
Thanks, guys. See you next week.
You've been listening to The Wizard and the Priestess. Thanks for stopping by. Stay connected and be open.